Hola, welcome back to another week of Box Office Buckets. We have another great video planned. I say that every week. I don't really know why, but got some cool topics to cover. I'm going to try to keep this one shorter. I think I've got a little bit of a plan, a little bit of a, outline, I think. So, yeah, I think it's going to be cool. This is going to be nice. Let's just start off how I feel like we usually do with college football. A lot of big games this past weekend, a lot of really cool stuff. Obviously, probably the biggest game was Oregon beating Penn State in a game that went to double overtime. I would say it's somewhat surprising. I think Penn State was looked at as the better team. I just think, James Franklin it just gets to a point where every coach struggles in big games. There's not a lot of coaches with a lot of big game winning records, but he's like 1-16. I just don't know at what point you keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And I'm really not sure what'll be. If he were to end up getting fired, what's the inciting incident? Because they've let it go on for so long, and I just feel like you lose in a pretty similar way that you lost in the playoff last year. I just feel like there's not a lot of growth there. They're obviously a very talented team, but I think we'll see. I mean, if I'm the organization at Penn State, I'm extremely disappointed, and I'm looking at other candidates because this is just not good enough. You're too good to be losing these games, and but that's just my 2 cents. I mean, I'm obviously not qualified to say that, but Ole Miss beat LSU 24-19. It was a little bit of a surprise. I think Ole Miss was looked at as a very solid team, not necessarily a top 10 team. And I think LSU was looked at as a top 10 team. And I think probably the opposite kind of is how we're looking at it now. Ole Miss is thoroughly in the playoff race. They're undefeated. They've got a really good quarterback. LSU is kind of struggling. They're kind of the opposite of where they were last year. Where I felt like last year they were really good offensively, not getting a lot of stops defensively. It's kind of the opposite this year. The defense is holding up. They're not getting nothing going offensively. And I think it's interesting when we look back at how big of a game Clemson and LSU was, and now both of them are trending downward, especially Clemson. LSU's for sure not out of the playoff race, but I think this idea that they're the best team in the country is just not it. Right now, it's just a no. Illinois beat USC 34-32. I watched that game. It was not the greatest game ever. I think if you're USC, you forced 2 goal line fumbles and still lost the game. That's just not great. I feel like this is just kind of who they are. It's not incredibly surprising, but they're kind of like Penn State. It's just like they keep doing the same thing over and over again in these big games. And I think you get to a certain point where it's just like, when you lose games again and again and again, you have to sit down and say to yourself, as an organization, what are we going to do differently next time that's going to change the result? If we lost the last game, what are we going to do differently the next game? And a lot of these organizations just seem afraid, unable to. Maybe they just don't want to make those changes. But if you want to start winning, you have to make those changes. You have to say, we're going to do this differently next time so that we don't repeat what happened last time. Learning from your mistakes. And that's something that a lot of these teams just don't seem to be able to do. Indiana beat Iowa 20-15. Indiana needed that win. Obviously, they got the big win against Illinois. Had to keep up it. You want to keep undefeated. Keep the train moving. Obviously, a little bit of a tight game, but I think that's just what happens when you play Iowa. They're that type of team. They're not always going to beat these big teams, but they're going to keep it close. That's just Iowa football. And I think that's just a testament to the organization that they built. And that's something I think they should be very proud of as an organization. And probably next to Oregon and Penn State, probably the biggest game was Alabama beating Georgia 24-21. That puts Alabama thoroughly right back in the playoff race. I know they open the season, they lose to the Florida State team that is much better than was expected. I know it was the end of the world. You got to fire everybody. Everybody's got to go. I definitely think Alabama is back. I think there's a long season. They beat Georgia last year and then went on to lose to Vanderbilt the next week, which I'm going to talk about in just a second, see if history repeats itself. But I think it's really interesting. We'll see what ends up happening there with Alabama. I still think Georgia's a very good team, but it's a disappointing loss. I feel like Alabama's kind of their kryptonite. It seems like no matter what, they just end up losing to Bama. So we'll see how that ends up for the rest of the season. So let's just jump right into that next topic for the upcoming games. We have 5-0 Vandy versus 3-1 Alabama coming off that win against Georgia. College game day is going to be there for a Vanderbilt game. That is insane. That's crazy. That is awesome for Vanderbilt. Don't get me wrong. That's awesome. It's just not something I think a lot of people saw coming. And if you're Vanderbilt, I mean, this is your chance. This is probably the best team they've had that I can remember. This is a really good chance for them to come out and prove to themselves to be national contenders. Can they do it? I don't know. They beat them last year, but you beat them again. You're 6-0. You're undefeated halfway through the season. You beat Bama. You beat South Carolina. You've got those big wins. I'm looking out for Vanderbilt, man. This might just be their year. You also have Florida State, Miami. Obviously, Florida State coming off that loss against Virginia last Friday. Heck of a game, overtime. Virginia's field is insane. It was like, I think he still had the ball. It just hit the ground. Everybody's rushing in. That was crazy. That's a safety hazard. But, Florida State obviously, wants to come out, get this big win. If you could beat Miami, you're right back in the playoff race. Everybody's going to forget about Virginia. And if you're Miami, you just want to keep the ball rolling. You want to get another big win and establish yourself as a top 3-4 team in the country. So we'll see what ends up happening there. The biggest point, I think, from college football this past weekend is, like I talked about last week, we're really starting to see we're establishing a new level of contenders. We come into the preseason with, so-and-so's good, so-and-so's good, so-and-so's good. We're finding out what teams are legit and what teams are not. We definitely thought, a lot of people thought LSU was going to be much better than Ole Miss. The opposite of that kind of seems to be true. With Oregon beating Penn State, that thoroughly puts Oregon back pretty much on top of college football, lowers Penn State some. So we're really kind of starting to see who the contenders are, who the pretenders are. Obviously, Bama and Georgia. Alabama, I felt like really started the season looking like a pretender. They're now getting much more back into contender form. So we'll see where a lot of that goes. I think there's a lot of interesting storylines, and we'll see what this next weekend ends up looking like. But I'm excited to talk about it. I think there's going to be a lot of cool stuff. And, stay safe out there. All right, for the NFL, we had a lot of big games. The Steelers beat the Vikings in Dublin 24-21. I had to look at the script like 3 times for that. Another big win for the Steelers. I wouldn't say it's incredibly surprising. I think Carson Wentz is kind of coming back to earth for the Vikings a little bit. Obviously had that great first game. But I think if you're Pittsburgh, you're happy. Aaron Rodgers is doing good. You just kind of want to keep the ball rolling, kind of stay as this sneaky playoff contender. And we'll see what ends up happening with them. Obviously, if you're Minnesota, you're starting to think, okay, when does J.J. McCarthy come back? It was fun with Carson Wentz. He's very talented. He just makes dumb decisions. I think he's very talented, but I think when things get tough, he bails, he makes bad decisions, he throws picks. That's just kind of who he is. He's a lot like Daniel Jones. Always had the talent, never had the mental power to do it. Chiefs beat the Ravens 37-20. One of those teams was going to come out there 1-3. Not where you want to be. The Chiefs, I think it's a great win for them. Gives them some confidence. Gives them a little bit of an ego boost. If you're the Ravens, you know what? I'm going to hold that. I'm going to talk about the Ravens here in a minute because very, very disappointing. It looked like Lamar Jackson got injured. I don't really know what his status is. I think it's kind of up in the air. It doesn't seem to be something too bad. So hopefully he gets back soon and it's nothing too serious. The Packers beat the Cowboys, or Packers didn't beat the Cowboys. Packers and Cowboys tied 40-40 in overtime. Scoregami. It's never happened before. It was a really great game. I feel like the Packers are kind of disappointing. I feel like they started the season so great, and now it's like they're not really carrying some of that momentum. That's a little bit disappointing, and I think if you're Dallas, this was obviously a charged up emotionally game, given the Micah Parsons situation. And I think it's weird both sides are just kind of like, both sides kind of lost. Neither side won, so both sides lost is probably the best way I feel like you could put this. People are like, oh, it's not a loss, but I think if you're both teams, you're looking at it as a loss. You're treating it as a loss because it's not a win. That's a paradox. That's interesting. The Texans finally got their first win of the season over the Titans, 26-0. Titans continue to struggle. I still, they're a rebuilding team. It's fine. I don't think that they're super concerned. I think this is a bad season. You get a high draft pick, bring in more talent, bring in better players. They'll be better next year. You're just looking to build on some stuff, get Cam Ward some really good reps, and we'll see what happens with them. Texans obviously 1-3, not where you want to be, but I think they could definitely turn it around. They obviously have the defense, they have the quarterback. They're just looking to build on this, make it a good start and continue to win some games and get some confidence, get some momentum build. So we'll see what ends up happening with them. The Giants beat the Chargers, got their first win of the season, 21-18. Jackson Dart came in, won his first game. I think that's a really great sign of confidence for the Giants. I think that's something that's got to make you feel good if you're a Giants fan. If you're a Giants organization, obviously you spend the first-round draft pick, late first, to get Jackson Dart. Obviously, it's one game, right? But I think it's a good start. It's a good building block. The only really tough thing about the weekend is obviously Malik Neighbors is feared to have an ACL tear, which is awful. Wish him nothing but the best. But it's probably the best time if that was going to happen, because I feel like you're still another year or so off rebuilding that team a little bit. So it's better to happen now than in a couple years when they're looking to be a playoff contender. If Jackson Dart can keep playing good football, and obviously they have the defense. So we'll see what ends up happening with that. Hopefully it's not an ACL tear, but I think everything I've heard says that it probably is. And the Chargers, that's just disappointing. I think a lot of them as a team, every team loses. It's not the end of the world, but the Giants, really? But that's kind of interesting. All right, so we got a couple of really good upcoming games. The Buccaneers 3-1 and the Seahawks 3-1. I think that's a really interesting game. I think the Buccaneers, people are really talking about them a lot, and I think they're a very good team. Baker Mayfield obviously playing still really great football, and the Seahawks are 3-1. That's honestly to me kind of surprising. I think a lot of people thought Sam Darnold looks really good in Minnesota, where he's throwing to Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and playing for Kevin O'Connell, and he's going to go to Seattle and go back to seeing ghosts. Obviously, starting the season off 3-1 is a very great start for him. I think he has to be very happy with the way he's played. Obviously, they won Thursday Night Football against the Cardinals last week. So I think they got to be very happy with that. And we also have Thursday Night Football, the 49ers and Rams, both 3-1. I think that's going to be a really good matchup. I think the 49ers are another team no one's really talking about. 3-1, playing well, putting up good numbers. Obviously, Nick Bosa had that, I want to say ACL tear as well, unfortunately, out for the year. Really tough break for that defense, but I definitely think they can keep going. They've just got to get healthy. They've had the talent. They had the talent last year. They've just got to get healthy. They've got to get out of the injured reserve and really put some stuff together. And I think if you're the Rams, you're just looking to continue the wins, keep it going. I think they're such a good team. I think they have a really good defense. I think offensively, one of the best teams in the NFL. I'm expecting a lot from them. So we'll see. I think these are two solid teams. Be really interested to see who ends up coming out on top of these matchups. But, my main point for the weekend about the NFL that I wrote down was the Ravens have got to do something, man. They have too much talent to be at the level there. They're like that friend that everyone has who's really smart but just doesn't try, and everybody thinks is stupid. And you say, no, they're not stupid. They just don't try. That's what I feel like the Ravens are at. And that's not to say that they're not trying, but that is not a 1-3 team, okay? That it's just not. They're too good on both sides of the ball. And I think if you're the Ravens organization, you're going to have to sit down and say, like I said earlier, what changes are we going to make that is going to change the outcome in the future? It's that simple. We have too good of a team to be doing this, and it's still early, but 1-3 is not where you want to be, even just for making the playoffs, all right? It's not going to be easy, and I don't want to say head coaching change is where it's at, but I'm saying at a certain point you're going to have to do something, because clearly what's happening is not going to cut it. You're going to have to make some kind of a change, and I don't know what that is. I'm not hoping anyone gets fired. Just throwing that out there, but they're going to have to do something, man. And I think the Bengals are in trouble. I talked about if Jake Browning could come out and play competent football. We're not really seeing a lot of that. I think there are options. I think the concept of Jameis Winston there is fun. Throwing in Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. Probably throw 20 touchdowns and 20 interceptions in his first couple of games. I think that's exciting, though. I think that's an interesting idea. Giants obviously not really going to have much use for Jameis. I think it's a fun idea. I don't know if it'll happen or not. I also think Kirk Cousins is a good option. I would call up Atlanta and ask them what they wanted, because he's obviously still a very talented quarterback who deserves another chance throwing in that offense. And you can't punt on another year. You're paying too much money. You have too many good players to just punt on another year. And if Jake Browning isn't going to cut it, you're going to have to find a quarterback somewhere else who can. But yeah, that's about all I have for the NFL. We'll see what happens this upcoming weekend. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff coming up. And yeah, we'll see where it leads us. For the NBA, not a ton to talk about. Obviously, I have Media Day this week. A lot of kind of little storylines starting, but not too much to talk about. The AD is going to be wearing protective lenses from now on, which I just think is kind of interesting. Apparently, Victor Wembanyama grew an inch. That's interesting. Not too much to talk about really, as far as in-depth stuff. Just really getting excited for the season upcoming. Going to be starting soon. Preseason starting soon. So yeah, we've got a lot to look forward to there, and I can't wait to talk more about it. All right, for movies, we had probably one of the biggest movies of the year, in one battle after another, come out this past weekend. Paul Thomas Anderson, Leonardo DiCaprio, being reviewed as one of the best movies of the year. I haven't seen it. I'm very interested. I've heard a lot of things. A lot of people seem to really like it. So I'll be really interested to see it, see if it kind of holds up. I think a lot of things, people are like, oh, it's the greatest thing ever. And you're like, yeah, maybe it's not. And sometimes it actually really is just the greatest thing ever. But so at the box office, it came in first with about $22 million. Demon Slayer came in, nope, I'm reading that wrong. Gabby's Dollhouse came in second with $13 million. I don't really know what that is. That's, if you're a big fan, throw it in the comments and I'll learn about it. I don't really know much about it, but Demon Slayer came in third with $7 million. Same thing. I just don't really know about it. Conjuring came in fourth, $6.5 million. Still, I feel like going strong. They're gonna make those movies for 100 years. It has made too much money. It has too much of an audience pool. That is incredible. Nothing but, and they deserve it. It was a great movie. Great cast. Awesome franchise. So they deserve it. And The Strangers Chapter 2 raked in $5.8 million. Just about. Not incredibly surprised it underperformed. I was very confused, like I said last week, at the concept of it. I feel like the original didn't come out that long ago. And not only to reboot a movie that's not that old, but we're going to reboot it as a trilogy. And it's not that complex of a story, okay? It's three robbers in the home. Or, not robbers, but you know what I mean. Three murderers in the home. There's other ideas for sure, but it doesn't really seem like they're really, using all the editorial power and creative juices that they have. I feel like it looks very basic, very mid, as the kids would call it these days. I hope it's good. I thought the trailer looked cool, honestly, but we'll see. Maybe I come back and review it, and I'm like, this is awesome, I was wrong. I have been many times in the past. Will for sure be many times in the future. But I was just very confused by this. I'm not super surprised it failed. I really want to see the pitch. I would be more interested in the pitch than I am the movie, as to how they were able to convince the studio to greenlight not one but 3 films. Obviously not a ton of money, but it's still very fascinating to me. So we'll see what happens with that. Upcoming, we have The Smashing Machine, directed by Benny Safdie, obviously starring The Rock. I think that's going to be very good. I think it's the movie he needed. He obviously had some really good, depth roles when he was younger. Kind of morphed into this weird, one-dimensional character in a lot of films that I like, honestly. I think he's cool, but I do understand people he's playing the same character in every movie. So I think it'll be really interested to see him in a much deeper role. I've heard a lot of really good things about it. And I think it's kind of funny that he clearly was just choosing to do those roles for years. I was like, screw it, I'm going to show you all that I really can act. There's been a lot of conversations about wrestlers turned actors. A lot of disses thrown his way, so I think he's kind of come out to retake his crown a little bit. So we'll see what happens with that. We also have Bone Lake. I don't have too much of a synopsis written down, but it looks very interesting. Psychological horror thriller about a couple of couples at a cabin. I think it looks really cool. I love horror, so it looks very interesting. And obviously, one of my most anticipated films in Good Boy, which is a horror film told from the point of view of a dog. That is awesome. I love that. I love dogs. Horror movies. What more could you want? I mean, is that not amazing? Are you not entertained, people? I really hope he doesn't die. If he dies, I legitimately might just die in the theater too. I might just give up living. But we'll see what happens there. I think that's going to be a very fun film. We've heard a lot of good stuff. Very interested in that. That dog is adorable. Oh my gosh. He's so cute. Can't wait to see what happens there. But obviously we're in October. We're going to have a lot of good horror movies coming up. Very excited about that. I love horror. I love the genre. So we'll see what happens with that. As far as movies and TVs goes, I'll just throw this in there now. My plan right now is really just to kind of keep doing what I've been doing, do kind of a loose covering of what's been going on in the movie and TV world in these videos. And then once I figure out how to actually make shorts, I'll review films, TV shows, probably like whole seasons, to kind of talk about it with you guys and get some thoughts out there. So it's not all bunched up into one super long mega video. As far as TV shows, we had new episodes in Task, Peacemaker, getting close to the finale. We released Marvel Zombies last week. I've heard a lot of really cool stuff about that. I think the animation looks really cool. A lot of people are very into that. I think What If is a fascinating idea because there's so many options with Marvel, but I feel like they've always kind of played it safe. So making it, TVMA, making, what looks to be some really, kind of new character decisions, I think will be really good for Marvel. I'm excited to see it. I think it looks really cool. Great to release in the Halloween season. I feel like Disney is kind of misunderstood. They released Haunted Mansion the other year in like late July, and that was just something that was always confusing because it was like, why not release it? It's a Halloween movie. Why not release it around Halloween? That's when the audience will want to see it. So I'm glad they figured out how to actually release something at the time that it makes sense to release it. See if that continues. But I'm not meaning to sound like a jerk there. I'm just got some thoughts there. Also had Gen V release a new episode. Very excited that I've seen a lot of people don't seem to like it. I thought the first season was really good. I think this new season is really cool. And I'm really interested to see how it's going to build into The Boys season 5, obviously the last season. Very interested to see what ends up happening there. I can't wait for the last season of The Boys. I think it's going to be so good. Season 4 was so much fun. Can't wait to see Soldier Boy back. Just going to be a really great final season, I think. And the highlight of the week is Chad Powers, released episode 1 and 2, starring Glenn Powell. Obviously produced by the Manning brothers, based off the YouTube character that Eli Manning made up. I think this is a fascinating show. I think it looks hilarious. I love football. I love TV, obviously, so it's so cool to see these combined. Can't wait to see it. I think it looks like a really great show. It looks very funny. And I also think, this is just kind of random, but it's funny, he plays for Oregon and dropped the ball in the national championship, obviously. Something that happened to Oregon many years ago. I do believe Marcus Mariota's Heisman year, they were playing Utah, and Utah ran it all the way down and dropped the ball before it got in the end zone. That's just a random thing that I remember, but I just think it's funny how those kind of connect. But I really can't wait to see this. I think it's going to be really cool, and I think the story looks really compelling. We talk so much about football. Imagine you're in the national championship and drop the ball on the goal line to lose the game. I mean, that is probably one of the worst things that could happen, and I think that is just a really compelling story, and I'm really interested to see how it delves into some of those more emotional moments, as well as the comedy, which looks hilarious. It's also funny that he says he's from West Virginia, which obviously is where I'm from. So that's cool to get a little bit of a shout out, even though I don't know that Chad is our best representative, but, we'll see with that. But a lot of cool stuff coming up, a lot of stuff to keep up with. I can't wait to talk about it more. So, yeah, guys, stay safe out there. We're going to be here, talk about some cool stuff, and peace.